Winter 1946. The war was over, but for thousands of German prisoners, survival had just begun. Behind the barbed wire of Camp Remagen, hunger became the only enemy that mattered. Hilda Müller was 24 years old and starving. What she found behind the mess hall that frozen February morning would break her completely, but not in the way she ever imagined. The morning roll call felt like it lasted forever. Hilda stood in the mud, her thin prison uniform soaked through from the night's rain. Her body shook, not just from the cold, but from the gnawing emptiness that had become her constant companion. 6 months in this American POW camp had reduced her to bones and willpower. She barely recognized herself anymore. Anna Schneider stood beside her, a ghost of the bright-eyed girl who had arrived in September. At 19, Anna should have been planning her future, dreaming of family and children. Instead, she spent her days counting the hours between meager rations, fantasizing about bread. The war had ended 9 months ago, but peace felt like a distant concept. Germany lay in ruins. The camps were overflowing with prisoners. The Allies themselves struggled with food shortages across occupied Europe. The official ration for German POWs had been cut multiple times. What had started as minimal had become nearly nothing. Hilda had been a communications officer with the Wehrmacht Auxiliary Forces. She had never fired a weapon, never killed anyone. She had transmitted messages, filed reports, translated documents. When the Americans captured her unit in April 1945, she expected to be processed and released quickly. She had been naive. The compound at Camp Remagen stretched across a former military installation near the Rhine River. Rows of crude barracks housed thousands of women separated from the larger male POW population. The facilities were basic, sanitation was poor, and food was scarce. Disease spread regularly through the cramped quarters. Dysentery, tuberculosis, and pneumonia claimed lives weekly. But it was hunger that haunted everyone. The gnawing, constant, all-consuming hunger that made sleep impossible and turned every waking thought into an obsession with food. Hilda dreamed of her mother's potato soup, her grandmother's dark bread, even the turnip stew they had eaten during the worst days of the war. Anything would be better than the watery gruel and occasional piece of hardtack they received now. Major Catherine Hayes ran Camp Remagen with military precision. She was tall, stern-faced, with gray streaks in her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had lost a brother at Normandy and a cousin in the Ardennes. Her compassion for German prisoners was limited. She followed orders, maintained discipline, and kept the camp running on the impossibly small budget and resources allocated to POW operations. But Hayes was not cruel. She was simply overwhelmed. Thousands of prisoners, insufficient supplies, conflicting orders from above, pressure from local Germans who were also starving, and the constant moral weight of being responsible for former enemies who were now helpless women in her custody. The guards varied in their treatment of prisoners. Some, like Sergeant Robert Fletcher, maintained harsh discipline. Fletcher had seen combat in France and Germany. He had witnessed concentration camps during the liberation. His hatred for anything German ran deep and personal. He enforced every rule strictly, showed no flexibility, and seemed to take satisfaction in the prisoners' suffering. Others, like Corporal James Sullivan, tried to maintain their humanity. Sullivan ran the mess hall operations. He had served in the Pacific Theater, seen terrible things, but had somehow retained a sense of basic human decency. He followed regulations, but he did not go out of his way to make the prisoners suffer more than they already did. The mess hall stood at the center of the compound, a large wooden structure that had once served as a German military warehouse. Meals were distributed twice daily. Breakfast consisted of weak coffee substitute and sometimes a piece of bread. Dinner was thin soup, occasionally with potato or turnip pieces, and more bread when available. The portions were calculated to keep prisoners alive, but not healthy. Malnutrition was universal. Women fainted during roll call regularly. Hair fell out. Teeth loosened. Skin developed sores that would not heal. The camp medical staff, themselves overworked and undersupplied, could do little beyond treating the most critical cases. Hilda had learned to move slowly to conserve energy. She had learned to sleep as much as possible to escape the hunger. She had learned not to talk about food because it made everything worse. She had learned to stay warm by pressing close to other prisoners in the barracks at night. She had learned that hope was dangerous because it made disappointment unbearable. This particular February morning felt colder than usual. The overnight rain had turned to sleet just before dawn. The mud in the yard had frozen into uneven ridges that made walking treacherous. Hilda's shoes, thin and worn, provided almost no protection. Her feet had been numb for weeks. After roll call, the prisoners shuffled toward the mess hall for breakfast. The line moved slowly. Everyone was weak. Everyone was careful with their limited energy. Fighting or pushing never happened anymore. Nobody had the strength for conflict. Hilda received her portion, a cup of lukewarm brown liquid that vaguely resembled coffee and half a piece of hard bread. She ate slowly, making it last, trying to trick her stomach into feeling satisfied. It never worked, but the ritual provided structure. Anna sat across from her at the long wooden table. They did not speak much anymore. Conversation required energy, and energy was precious. They had shared their life stories weeks ago during the early days when they still believed their imprisonment might be brief. Now they simply existed in proximity, two humans sharing suffering. After breakfast, prisoners were assigned to work details. The Geneva Convention prohibited forcing POWs into labor that directly supported military operations, but cleaning, maintenance, laundry, and similar tasks were permitted. In practice, the work was exhausting for starving women, but it was also preferable to sitting idle in the cold barracks with nothing to distract from hunger. Hilda had been assigned to the mess hall cleaning crew for the past month. It was both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because she was indoors, out of the weather. A curse because she was surrounded by the smell of food, by the glimpses of supplies she could never access, by the constant reminder of what she did not have. The work involved scrubbing pots, washing dishes, mopping floors, and cleaning tables. Corporal Sullivan supervised. He was quiet, efficient, and fair. He never yelled, never struck anyone, but he also never gave extra food. He followed the rules exactly. Hilda had noticed something about Sullivan over the weeks. He seemed troubled. He would sometimes pause while checking inventory, his face clouded with something that looked like guilt or sadness. He spoke little to the prisoners, but when he did, his voice lacked the edge of contempt present in other guards. On this particular morning, Sullivan was directing 2 German prisoners to move empty supply crates from behind the mess hall to the storage area. The back area of the mess hall was normally off limits to prisoners. Guards only allowed access when specific tasks required it. Hilda was scrubbing pots near the back door when she heard Sullivan called away to deal with some administrative matter. He left quickly, telling the prisoners to continue working. For the first time in months, Hilda found herself near the back area of the mess hall with no direct supervision. The temptation was overwhelming. Maybe there was food back there. Maybe something had been discarded. Maybe, just maybe, she could find something to ease the constant pain in her belly. The risk of punishment was enormous. Being caught in an unauthorized area could mean solitary confinement, reduced rations, or worse. But hunger overrode fear. Hilda glanced around. The other prisoners were focused on their tasks. No guards were immediately visible. Her heart pounded as she quietly moved toward the back door. She slipped outside into the cold morning air. The area behind the mess hall was muddy and cluttered with empty crates, broken equipment, and piles of trash. A high fence topped with barbed wire marked the compound's boundary about 50 meters away. Guard towers loomed in the distance. Hilda moved carefully, looking for anything edible. Her eyes scanned the garbage piles. Sometimes the Americans threw away food that Germans would gladly eat. Stale bread, vegetable scraps, anything. Then she saw it. Behind a stack of wooden crates, partially covered by a tarpaulin, were several burlap sacks. They looked full. Hilda's breath caught. Could it be food? Supplies waiting to be distributed? Her hands trembled as she approached. She pulled back the tarpaulin. The sacks were filled with bread. Dozens of loaves. Maybe hundreds. Not moldy, not spoiled. Fresh enough bread that should have been distributed to the prisoners. Beside the bread were other sacks containing potatoes, carrots, and what looked like dried meat. Hilda's mind could not process what she was seeing. Why was this food hidden back here? Why were the prisoners starving when this existed? Her emotions crashed over her in waves. Rage, confusion, grief, betrayal. Were the guards stealing food meant for prisoners? Was this evidence of corruption? Were they selling supplies on the black market while women died of starvation? Her hands touched the bread, confirming it was real, not a hallucination brought on by hunger. Tears began streaming down her face. All the suffering, all the hunger, all the death in the barracks from malnutrition while food sat hidden behind the mess hall. She wanted to scream. She wanted to take the bread and run. She wanted answers. Then she heard footsteps. Hilda spun around, terrified. Corporal Sullivan stood 10 feet away, his face unreadable. He had caught her. She was finished. Punishment would be severe. She stood frozen, tears still on her cheeks, unable to speak. Sullivan looked at her, then at the exposed supplies, then back at her face. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with consequence. Finally Sullivan spoke quietly. His voice was not angry. It was tired. "You were not supposed to see this." Hilda found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Why? Why is this here while we starve?" Sullivan glanced around, ensuring they were alone. He seemed to be wrestling with something internal, some decision. When he spoke again, his words came slowly, carefully. "This food is not stolen. It is not corruption. It is something else. Something more complicated." Hilda shook her head, not understanding. Sullivan sighed deeply. "The official rations for German POWs are set by command. They are calculated to the gram. I receive exactly the amount authorized to feed you, and I distribute exactly what I am ordered to distribute. Not more, not less. But this," Hilda gestured at the supplies, "this food is not authorized. It does not exist on paper. It never appears in my inventory reports. I do not understand." Sullivan moved closer, his voice dropping even lower. "There are people who do not agree with how German POWs are being treated. Some American soldiers who think the rations are inhumane. Some local civilians who feel compassion despite everything Germany did. They quietly donate food. They give it to me secretly, and I am supposed to secretly distribute it." Hilda's tears continued, but now confusion mixed with her grief. "Then why hide it? Why not give it to us?" "Because it is illegal. Unauthorized. If command discovers that I am distributing non-regulation food to German prisoners, I will be court-martialed. I will lose my rank, possibly face prison time myself. The people donating would also face charges for aiding enemy prisoners. But we are starving." "I know." Sullivan's voice cracked slightly. "I know. I see it every day. I serve you those pathetic portions, and I see your faces, and I know it is not enough. It is killing me. Then why not just give us this food? Risk the punishment? You could save lives." Sullivan looked away, struggling. "I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But then I thought about what happens if I am caught. I get removed. Someone like Fletcher takes over the mess hall. Someone who will not care, who will not try to help at all. At least if I stay, I can do small things. I can make sure portions are fair. I can add extra water to make the soup go farther. I can save the best pieces of bread for the sickest prisoners. That is not enough. Women are dying. I know. Do you think I do not know that?" Sullivan's composure cracked. "I fought in this war. I killed people. I saw my friends die. I thought when it ended, the dying would stop. But it has not stopped. You are all still dying, just slower. And I am part of it." They stood in silence, two people on opposite sides of an impossible situation. Finally, Hilda asked the only question that mattered. "What were you planning to do with this food?" Sullivan took a deep breath. "Tonight. I was going to distribute it tonight after dark. I have been waiting for the right moment. A night when Fletcher is not on duty, when there are fewer guards paying attention. I was going to claim it was a one-time supply delivery that arrived off schedule. It is a weak excuse, but it might work once. Maybe I can get away with it one time before anyone investigates too closely. One time. All of this. It would make such a difference. It would keep all of you alive for another few weeks. Buy time until spring when supply lines improve. That is what I keep telling myself." Hilda looked at the bread, at the potatoes, at this man who was risking everything despite having every reason to hate Germans. Her tears continued, but now they carried a different weight. Not just grief and anger, but something more complex. Gratitude mixed with guilt. Recognition of shared humanity in the middle of inhumanity. "Why are you telling me this? Why not just report me for being back here?" Sullivan met her eyes. "Because you deserve to know. Because you deserve to understand that not everyone wants you to suffer. Because maybe if you know, you can help me figure out how to distribute this food tonight without getting caught. You would trust me? Trust a German prisoner?" I trusted you enough to bring food for you. That part is already done. The question now is whether we can work together to actually get it to the people who need it. The absurdity of the situation was not lost on Hilda. An American corporal and a German POW, former enemies, standing behind a mess hall conspiring to break military regulations to feed starving prisoners. 6 months ago, this scenario would have been impossible to imagine. What do you need me to do? Sullivan thought for a moment. I need the prisoners ready. I need them to know that tonight, after final roll call, there will be an unexpected food distribution. But they cannot react with excitement or surprise. They need to accept it quietly, quickly, like it was planned all along. If anyone makes a scene, if anyone questions it too loudly, the guards will investigate. I can tell them. I can make sure they understand. Tell only people you absolutely trust. Anna, maybe 2 or 3 others. Have them spread the word quietly throughout the day. By tonight, everyone should know, but it needs to stay quiet. They will stay quiet. I promise you, we can do this. Sullivan nodded. Then his expression became stern again, the professional mask returning. Now get back inside. You were never out here. You saw nothing. If anyone asks, you were cleaning pots the entire time. Corporal Sullivan? Hilda's voice stopped him as he turned. Why are you doing this after everything Germans did? The war, the camps, everything, why help us? Sullivan was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of something he had been carrying for years. I was at Dachau. When we liberated it, I saw what was done there. The bodies, the survivors who were barely alive, the evidence of systematic murder. I hated every German alive after that day. I wanted all of you to suffer exactly as those people suffered. He paused, his jaw tight. But then I got assigned here, and I saw you. German prisoners, yes, but also just people. Women who were cold and hungry and scared. I saw mothers asking about their children. Sisters asking about brothers. I saw human beings, not monsters. And I realized that if I let you starve, if I participate in your suffering, then I become exactly what I hated. I become someone who can watch people die and do nothing. So this is about your conscience, not about us. Maybe. I do not know anymore. Maybe helping you helps me live with what I saw, what I did during the war. Maybe I need to save someone to balance out all the death. Or maybe I just cannot watch more people die. Maybe the reason does not matter as much as the action. Hilda understood. In that moment, she saw Sullivan not as an enemy, or even as a guard, but as another broken person, trying to find meaning in the aftermath of unthinkable horror. Thank you. Whatever your reasons, thank you. Sullivan nodded curtly and walked away. Hilda stood alone for another moment, looking at the hidden supplies, then carefully recovered them with the tarpaulin. She took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and went back inside to resume washing pots. The rest of the day passed in a blur of whispered conversations. Hilda pulled Anna aside during a work break and explained everything. Anna's eyes widened with disbelief, then hope, then determination. Together they identified trusted prisoners who could spread the word without causing panic. By afternoon, the entire women's compound knew. An unspoken understanding passed through the barracks. Tonight would be different. Tonight they would receive extra food. It had to stay quiet. It had to appear normal. The challenge was controlling the excitement. Women who had been hollow-eyed and defeated suddenly had light in their eyes. The prospect of real food, of enough food, was intoxicating. But everyone understood the stakes. One wrong word, one moment of drawing attention, and the opportunity would vanish. The day dragged endlessly. The afternoon work details felt longer than usual. The evening roll call was torture. Finally, as darkness fell and the February cold intensified, the prisoners were dismissed to their barracks for the night. Normally, this was when the compound settled into uneasy sleep. Tonight, everyone stayed alert, waiting. An hour after dark, a whistle sounded. The guards announced an unscheduled food distribution. Prisoners were instructed to line up outside the mess hall for supplementary rations. The announcement was delivered in a routine tone, as if this was a normal occurrence, nothing special. The prisoners filed out, maintaining discipline. No running, no shouting, no visible excitement. They lined up in orderly rows, exactly as they had been instructed. Sullivan stood at the mess hall door with several other guards helping with distribution. Sergeant Fletcher was notably absent, assigned to patrol duty on the far side of the compound. The timing was not accidental. As each prisoner passed through, she received a full loaf of bread, a handful of potatoes, carrots, and a portion of dried meat. Real food, substantial food, the kind of portions they had not seen in months. Some women wept silently as they received their rations. Others stood in shock, unable to process the unexpected bounty. A few whispered thank you to Sullivan as they passed, though he maintained his stern professional demeanor, acknowledging nothing. The distribution took nearly an hour. Hundreds of women receiving supplies that officially did not exist. The guards helping Sullivan asked no questions. Either they had been brought into the plan, or they chose not to see what was happening. Sometimes willful ignorance was its own form of resistance. When Hilda reached the front of the line, Sullivan handed her the same portions as everyone else. Their eyes met for only a second. No words were exchanged. None were needed. She took her food and moved on. Anna was behind her, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her bread like it was made of gold. By the time the last prisoner had been served, the hidden supplies were nearly exhausted. Sullivan announced that distribution was complete and ordered everyone back to barracks. The prisoners dispersed quietly, many of them still unable to believe what had happened. In the barracks, the atmosphere was electric despite the exhaustion. Women sat on their bunks carefully rationing their food, deciding whether to eat it all immediately or save portions for tomorrow. The smell of bread filled the cramped space, a scent that seemed impossible after months of deprivation. Hilda sat with Anna, both of them eating slowly, savoring every bite. The bread was coarse and plain, but it tasted like the finest cake. The potatoes were just potatoes, but they felt like luxury. For the first time in months, Hilda felt full, actually full. The constant aching hunger that had defined every waking moment finally, temporarily, eased. Around them, other women shared similar moments. Some laughed, some cried, some simply sat in silence, experiencing the relief of having enough food. It was more than physical nourishment. It was hope made tangible. It was proof that not everyone had abandoned them. It was humanity persisting despite everything. "I cannot believe he did that," Anna whispered. "He risked everything for us." "I know," Hilda replied. "I stood there this morning hating him, hating all of them, thinking they were deliberately starving us. But Sullivan, he was carrying his own burden, trying to help while being trapped by regulations and fear and his own past. Do you think he will face punishment? I do not know. Maybe. If command investigates, they will find discrepancies. Missing inventory that was never recorded. He might be court-martialed. He might lose everything. But he did it anyway. He did it anyway." Anna looked at the remaining bread in her hands. "What does that say about us? About them? About everything we thought we knew about enemies and allies?" Hilda had been wrestling with the same question all day. The war had been presented in absolutes, Germans versus allies, us versus them, good versus evil, though which side represented which depended entirely on perspective. But Sullivan had shattered those absolutes. He had shown that compassion could exist across battle lines, that individuals could resist systems they found unjust, that former enemies could work together toward survival. "I think it means the war is more complicated than we were told," Hilda said finally. "I think it means that people are not as simple as propaganda made them seem. Sullivan is not a villain, but he is also not a hero. He is just a man trying to do the right thing within impossible circumstances. And maybe that is more important than being a hero. Maybe just trying to help, even when it is dangerous and complicated. Maybe that is what actually matters. Will things change now? Will conditions improve? I do not know. This was a one-time event. Sullivan said he could probably only get away with it once. Command will notice the missing food eventually. He will have to answer questions. He might not be able to help again. So this was it. One night of enough food, then back to starvation. Maybe. Or maybe this gives us enough strength to survive until spring. Maybe this extra food keeps the sickest women alive for a few more weeks until supply lines improve. Maybe that was Sullivan's calculation. Buy time. Keep us alive just long enough for circumstances to change. Anna nodded slowly. Then we cannot waste it. We have to make this food last. We have to ration it carefully, share with the sickest women, make sure it does the most good possible. Around them, the same realization was spreading. Women who had initially planned to devour everything immediately were reconsidering. They began organizing, deciding to pool some resources to ensure the most vulnerable received extra portions. The gift of food had sparked something beyond just physical nourishment. It had rekindled community, cooperation, the instinct to care for one another. That night, Hilda slept better than she had in months. Her stomach was full, her body slightly warmer from the calories. But more than the physical comfort, she felt something she had almost forgotten. She felt seen. Sullivan's actions had proven that their suffering mattered to someone, that their lives had value even to a former enemy, that kindness could survive even in the aftermath of total war. The next morning, roll call proceeded normally. The guards gave no indication that anything unusual had happened. Sullivan was at his post outside the mess hall, his expression as stern and professional as always. When prisoners filed in for the meager official breakfast, he served the regulation portions without comment or acknowledgement. But Hilda noticed small things. The way Sullivan made sure the sick prisoners got portions with slightly more substance. The way he ignored when someone took an extra moment to scrape their bowl completely clean. The way he positioned himself to block certain guards' views of the serving line. Small acts of quiet resistance that would never appear in any official report. Over the following days, rumors circulated about investigations into supply discrepancies. Officers were seen reviewing inventory records. Sullivan was called to meetings with Major Hayes. The tension was palpable, but nothing official happened. No court-martial was announced. No formal charges were filed. Whether Hayes chose to look the other way, whether the discrepancies were too minor to warrant full investigation, or whether other factors intervened, the matter seemed to quietly disappear. Sullivan remained in charge of the mess hall. Life in the camp continued its harsh rhythm. But something had fundamentally changed. The prisoners carried themselves slightly differently. There was a resilience that had not existed before. The knowledge that compassion was possible, that help could come from unexpected sources, that not everyone wished them harm, gave them something to hold on to beyond just physical survival. March arrived, and with it came the first signs of spring. Slightly warmer weather, slightly longer days. The first shipments of improved rations began arriving as Allied supply lines stabilized and policies toward POW camps shifted under international pressure. The conditions remained difficult, but the acute starvation began to ease. Women who had been on the edge of death started to recover. The barracks felt less like a place of slow dying and more like a place of waiting for whatever would come next. One afternoon in early April, Hilda was assigned to clean the area behind the mess hall. It was the first time she had been back there since that February morning. The spot where the supplies had been hidden was now just empty space. Sullivan appeared, supervising as he always did. When they were briefly alone, he spoke quietly without looking directly at her. "I heard the war crimes tribunals will begin soon. Germans being held in camps will eventually be processed. Most will be released within the year." "I heard that too," Hilda replied, continuing her work. "When you get out, what will you do?" Hilda had thought about this constantly. Germany was destroyed. Her family's city had been bombed. She did not know who had survived. The future was terrifying and uncertain. "I will try to find my family, try to rebuild, try to live with everything that happened." Sullivan nodded. "That is all any of us can do." They worked in silence for a moment. Then Hilda asked the question that had haunted her. "Did you face punishment?" "For that night?" "Nothing official. Hayes knew something irregular happened. She is not stupid. But she also chose not to dig too deep. I think she understood why I did it even if she could not officially approve. You risked everything for us. I did what I had to do to live with myself. That is not heroism. That is just survival in a different way. It was more than that. You showed us that we were still human, still worth caring about. After everything, after being treated as less than human for so long, you reminded us that we mattered." Sullivan finally looked at her directly. "You always mattered. The war made us forget that, made us see enemies instead of people. But you always mattered." Hilda felt tears forming again. But these were different from the tears she had cried that February morning. These were tears of grief for lost time, lost humanity, lost innocence, but also tears of gratitude for the small acts that had kept hope alive. "When this is over, when we are all released and trying to build new lives, I will remember you. I will remember that an American soldier chose compassion when he could have chosen cruelty. I will tell people about this, about what you did." Sullivan shook his head. "Do not make me into something I am not. I am not a good person. I did one decent thing after months of watching suffering. That does not redeem me. Maybe not. But it mattered. It kept us alive. It gave us hope. In the aftermath of a war that destroyed everything, those small acts of decency are what allow us to rebuild. You were part of that rebuilding, whether you want credit or not." They parted without further words. Sullivan returned to his duties, and Hilda finished her cleaning. But something had been acknowledged between them, a shared understanding that in the chaos of war and its aftermath, individuals still had choices. They could choose cruelty or compassion, indifference or action. Those choices rippled outward in ways that could not be quantified or officially recorded, but that fundamentally shaped whether humanity survived its darkest impulses. By summer 1946, the camp population had decreased significantly as prisoners were processed and released. Hilda received her discharge papers in July. She was given civilian clothes, a small amount of money, and documentation proving she had been cleared of war crimes. The day she left Camp Remagen, she stood at the gate looking back at the compound that had been both prison and unexpected place of revelation. Anna was being released the same day, along with several dozen other women. Sullivan was not on duty that morning. Hilda did not get to say goodbye. Perhaps it was better that way. Some connections existed beyond words, beyond formal farewells. As she walked through the gate into an uncertain future, Hilda carried more than just her few possessions. She carried the memory of that February morning, of the discovery behind the mess hall, of the tears that had expressed both despair and unexpected hope. She carried the knowledge that even in the worst circumstances, compassion could emerge from unlikely sources. Germany lay in ruins, but it would rebuild. Hilda would find surviving family members, would eventually marry and raise children, would tell them stories about the war and its aftermath. And she would always tell them about Corporal James Sullivan, about hidden bread, about the moment when an enemy chose to be human instead. The war had taken so much. Millions dead, cities destroyed, innocents shattered. But in the small spaces between official policy and individual action, humanity persisted. Not perfectly, not consistently, but enough, just barely enough to provide foundation for rebuilding. Hilda walked down the road away from Camp Remagen, the summer sun warm on her face, her stomach full from the improved rations, her future uncertain but possible. Behind her, the camp continued operating, processing the last prisoners, gradually winding down operations. And in the mess hall, Corporal Sullivan served breakfast to the remaining prisoners, his face stern, his portions measured exactly to regulation, while quietly, invisibly, he continued to do small things that his conscience required. Not heroic things, just human things, which in the aftermath of inhumanity might be the most important things of all. If you made it this far, thank you for watching this powerful story of survival and unexpected humanity. Subscribe to see more untold stories from history. Hit the like button if this moved you, and let me know in the comments what historical story you'd like to hear next. See you in the next one.